So good afternoon and welcome to the GMC May membership meeting. I'm David Lubar, immediate past chair of the GMC. For this meeting, I'm filling in for Greg Marcus while he is traveling out of town today. We have an interesting and inspiring group of presenters today who will share the experience of artists and cultural institutions during the pandemic and how they anticipate arts and culture playing a role in the future of our region. But before we get into that, I'd like to have Heather, rather than Julia Taylor, who is also traveling today, share monthly GMC initiative updates. Heather?
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the May meeting. So for today's updates, we want to give a continuation of last month's Berline Trail updates to start. We have been hosting a series of webinars that celebrate a history of the Berline Trail, and most recently welcomed Reggie Jackson, who presented on the economic and community impact of the trail throughout history. Up until the late 70s, the Berline and the North Railroad lines literally carried Milwaukee's products and economic power. Harambe's African-American community grew around the many industries and the jobs that relied on those railroad lines. After the late 70s, over 75,000 jobs were lost along the Berline Trail as factories moved or closed. What was once a thriving community quickly turned into a disinvested community lacking jobs and stability. The importance of the Berline ties into the theme we'll hear from today's presenters about how art and culture creates economic equity through increased investment. The Berline Trail project includes a resident-driven equitable implementation plan to ensure the next phases of trail development are community-focused and future development inspired by and centered around the trail spaces benefits adjacent residents and businesses equitably. The Urban Institute has studied the trail and Milwaukee's night market for a report on creative placemaking projects in Milwaukee, which will be released this month and featured in the Berline Trail's final webinar on May 25th. Look for more details in your GMC newsletter. Next, the GMC and the Wisconsin Policy Forum are conducting a study about how Milwaukee's small business owners and entrepreneurs are operating in 2021. The results of the survey will allow the GMC to determine what kinds of technology-related challenges Milwaukee's small business community is facing and what policies might be effective in response. This survey will ask basic questions about small businesses, the technology used to run that business, and how business practices and needs may have changed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The information provided in the survey will be used as part of a report being written by the Wisconsin Policy Forum. And finally, we have been sending weekly newsletters on behalf of the Business Leader Vaccine Advisory Committee to aid employers in their vaccine and return to work efforts. At this point, there is plenty of vaccine available. However, there remain individuals who have not yet made the decision to get the vaccine. It is vitally important that we share timely and accurate vaccine safety and efficacy information throughout our networks. If you're not receiving that information via the newsletter, let me know. We typically send it on Thursdays. We've shared some great resources from our partners at Wisconsin DHS and our local VICOM group about how to host an employer vaccination clinic. And we know a few of our GMC members have already done this with success. Again, let me know if you're interested in hosting an employer clinic and we can help you in getting it started. Ensuring equitable access to the vaccines will be important to mitigate the disproportionate impacts of the pandemic for Black and Hispanic populations, preventing widening disparities going forward, and to help us achieve broad population immunity. And next, I would like to invite Dr. Ben Weston. He is a colleague of Dr. Raymond's from the Medical College of Wisconsin to share a COVID-19 update.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate the invite. Happy to be here. Big shoes to fill with Dr. Raymond, so I'm not going to follow his exact slide sets and try to replicate that. Now, his slides have been updated, and my understanding is they'll be sent out as part of a slide set. But I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach in kind of walking through current trends as well as some up-to-date issues on COVID for a few minutes here. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you can see, starting with our Milwaukee County dashboard. There we go. Cases on average per day in Milwaukee County. And on a promising front, we continue to see some downtrends from that direction. Now, likewise, when we look at our percent positivity for testing, we can see that we're also seeing a downtrend there. We've been right around 4.5% for the last few weeks. We went up just a touch and down a touch, but fairly stable. And we certainly hope that with increased vaccination, we'll continue to see this downtrend in percent positivity continue. Importantly, when we look at our hospital capacities and we look at the number of COVID-19 positive patients that are hospitalized at any given time, we did start to see it was a concerning uptrend back through much of April. However, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen this nice downtrend and now a bit of steadying. So nothing, of course, compared to what we saw back in November. And we've seen fairly stable numbers from the hospital capacity end as well. And when we look at deaths, our numbers have been stable in Milwaukee County for quite some time, with on average 1 to 2 individuals dying each day from COVID. When we look at our vaccination data, we do see some very concerning trends. So 2 areas to focus in on. One is this: when we look at the number of people receiving first doses, the number of people that are kind of entering into the process of getting vaccinated, at our peak was back in late March. We were over 6,000 people a day that were seeking out vaccination. And we've seen a precipitous drop, some leveling, which is encouraging, but a precipitous drop since then. And most recently, we're at about 1,700 people per day. So about 1/4 of what we were seeing at our high level. We're certainly seeing a transition in the approach to vaccination. No longer do we have the eager population that will take off of work, travel across town, look into how to get vaccinated and come to our mass vaccination clinics. So that's why you're seeing a shift to more localized vaccination strategies, as well as informing people who need a bit more motivation and information in order to go out and get vaccinated. I'm happy to talk more about that. We do want to focus, of course, on our vulnerable populations, and that's where our vaccine metrics come in. So this blue dotted line shows our percent of total population vaccinated. And then the orange line is the CDC defined high to moderately high and just high vulnerability groups. And the average for them is well below the overall average for the population. So we're watching both of those trend lines and trying to have them move as much in tandem as possible. Those trend lines do come from a variation in our municipality trends. So here you can see, excuse me, all the municipalities in Milwaukee County broken out by the percentage of their population that's been vaccinated. So to put some names to these lines, we can see that Shorewood has the highest level of vaccination. They've reached almost 72%. On the opposite end is the city of Milwaukee and West Milwaukee, which are around 32 to 34%. So a significant disparity just by the river that runs between Shorewood and the city of Milwaukee, nearly 40% difference in vaccination rates between the two. We did develop what's called the EVE model. This is a locally developed model. It stands for Evaluating Vulnerability and Equity. And this is really understanding how different populations based on the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index. So this looks at things such as income, access to transportation, job status, to categorize census tracts into high or low or moderate vulnerability. And what we saw in the beginning, what we continue to see, maybe not quite as extreme, is that we live in a county where there is orange and there's purple. And so orange are communities that are highly vulnerable, but not getting anywhere near as much vaccination. And that's all through here. And then we have all our surrounding purple communities that are low vulnerability and receiving much more vaccine. So this map does look better than it did 6 weeks ago when we first released this model. We're seeing significant improvements, but the disparities certainly continue, in particular between our populations of color and our white populations that surround them in the county. 2 other items just to touch on that may be of interest. One is we've certainly heard of the different variants or mutations of the virus. So just as a reminder, every time the virus replicates and is transmitted, some mutations occur. Typically, these mutations don't do anything and the virus doesn't thrive off of them. But every once in a while, a mutation takes hold and is advantageous to the virus. It makes it easier for the virus to infect somebody or to spread. And of course, advantages for the virus are disadvantages for us. The most widespread variant of concern is the B117, or often called the UK variant. And we can see how that has entered Wisconsin here. So the red line, this is a percent of total. So back in late January, which is here, there was pretty much no B117 in Wisconsin. And then we can see we followed pretty much the exact same path that the UK, other European countries have, and that the United States as a whole has, which is we go from about 20% to 80% in a matter of about 1 month. So right now, far and away, it's about 86% of the COVID infections in the state of Wisconsin are from the B117 variant. So if you get infected with COVID today, far and away, you're most likely to be infected with that B117 or UK strain. And of note, that strain is about 60% more contagious than the conventional strain that we were seeing back at our peak in the fall. So any activity you're engaging in, your risk is 60% higher given the same settings now than it was back then. And then the studies are showing that it's anywhere from 50 to 70% more severe. So if you contract COVID with this new strain, that's the dominant strain, you're 60 to 70% more likely to have severe illness, more likely to be hospitalized, or more likely to die from that infection. And then the last item I thought would be helpful to share is just an understanding of perspectives and motivation for the vaccine. So this is out of the Kaiser Family Foundation. It's a national study. They've been doing some of the best work on understanding individuals' approach to vaccination. So there's 4 different categories they put people into. Those who are very eager, already got, or want to get the vaccine as soon as possible. Those who want to wait and see and gather more information. And those who would only do it if required by their business or their community or their institution. And then those who definitely don't want to get the vaccine. So when we think about vaccine motivation and who we want to get the message to, this wait and see group is the one that has changed most over time and become more accepting of the vaccine. And also the one that is still open to opportunities to learn more about the vaccine. And this group trends overwhelmingly young and people of color and urban populations. So when we think of who to target, the city of Milwaukee is one of the most apt populations to target with vaccine messaging and opportunities to decrease barriers, whether those are transportation barriers, childcare barriers, work barriers to offer the vaccine. Now, when we look at definitely not, we see a bit of a different picture. So it tends to be affiliated with certain political groups, more rural populations, and then kind of a younger, but not quite as young population as well, that does not have interest at this point in getting the vaccine. And that's been a very stable group over time. There's been little change among that group, especially among the white population that says definitely not. There's been almost no change in that population. Populations of color have changed somewhat. Less of them have said definitely not than previously. But again, the wait and see population is certainly the one that we're working to target the most, which is that younger population of color in urban environments. So that's the update I have today. I guess one other point that might be helpful to know is that Milwaukee County and Wisconsin is pretty much on par with the rest of the country for vaccination. So for first doses, the country is at 46% of the population has received at least one dose. Wisconsin is at 44%, and then Milwaukee County is at 42%. So we're doing fairly well from that perspective, but still significant disparities to overcome. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions live or in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weston, for joining us today and for that update. You have our full support to turn those orange areas into the purple areas on the map. The GMC supports the importance of getting the vaccine to help keep us safe as we get back to in-person life, both at work and in our personal lives. So before we proceed to today's main presentation, we're going to hear from Greg Wesley, also from the Medical College, and one of the co-chairs of this year's UPAF campaign. So each spring, the GMC invites UPAF to a GMC membership meeting to hear about the campaign and to remind us how integral UPAF is to our day-to-day life, both from entertainment to education and many other ways. And so, Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I know that there's a film that you're going to be presenting us. And you're on mute.
I was trying to get out of the opportunity for that to happen, but it did. So we have a video coming up and then I'll follow that up. Thank you.
All of this will be coming back stronger than ever to a theater near you, but only with your help today. Play your parts and give generously to the United Performing Arts Fund now.
Thank you, David, and thank you all with the GMC for the opportunity to have a quick chat with you. Before I get started, I want to first acknowledge Steve Johnson with BMO Harris Bank and Heather Dunn with West Bend Mutual, the additional campaign co-chairs for this year. And it's a great honor to be working with both of them. COVID-19 has forced just about every component of the performing arts sector to change or adjust, making consistent funding from the United Performing Arts Fund more important than ever. So just a couple of facts here. UPAF member groups are projecting a loss of nearly $23 million due to COVID-19. So I'm going to tell you who the member groups are just to remind everyone. First Stage, Florentine Opera, the Milwaukee Ballet, the Milwaukee Rep, MSO, Skylight Theater, Black Arts MKE, Bel Canto Chorus, Dance Works, Milwaukee Chamber Theater, MISO, Next Act Theater, and Present Music. Another fact, nearly 90% of local artists are unemployed, impacting 1,000 families in our area. The performing arts groups was the first sector to close and will likely be among the last to fully reopen. Now, with those great struggles, the United Performing Arts groups have worked really hard to remain a consistent force in our community. During a time of health crisis and civil unrest, the performing arts groups, our local artists have continued to do what they do best, which is to entertain, educate, and inspire. The performing arts groups will play a critical role in helping our community heal, whether it be from the financial challenges or making social justice a priority in all that we do. They are embracing uncertainty. They're asking deep questions. They're leaning into discomfort. They're making room for all people, and they're questioning the status quo. They are essential in creating a community conversation to help us to address our shared humanity about how we can live better together as a community and as a society. Support of the 2021 UPAF campaign is critical, as I said previously, to supporting and sustaining our local performing arts organizations. Economically, it would also ensure that our local talent can remain in our community. We all benefit when we rally behind the talented artists and groups who bring us joy, make us laugh, lift our spirits, inspire hope, and make our region a better place to live, work, and play. Now, I have a pretty simple ask. I think people picked up on the theme. Play your part. I know everyone has done everything that they can to be supportive of our community. I'm asking you to dig a little bit deeper. Play your part. Support our world-class performing arts groups, our local artists, by making a company or personal commitment to the 2021 UPAF campaign. If you're able, share the opportunity with your employees by hosting a workplace giving campaign. But we really, really deeply need you to play your part. Again, I understand that everyone has, dug really deep, but I'm asking us to dig even deeper. A couple of facts. We're at 58% of our fundraising goal target, which is $11.3 million. We have 4 months to go, and we're confident that we can reach that goal with your support. About $5 million left to go, and I'm asking you all to do your part, support Milwaukee Arts so that they can thrive in the future. Thank you, David, and thank you to all the GMC members and my co-chairs.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for serving as one of this year's co-chairs to the UPAF campaign. The GMC supports the UPAF campaign and encourages our members and member companies to do their part, as Greg has asked. We're now going to hear from 5 leaders on how art and culture have shaped the history, architecture, and economy in Milwaukee, and their goals for their organizations for the future. Please join me in welcoming David Lee, Executive Director, Imagine Milwaukee; Mal Montoya, President, Milwaukee Artist Resource Network; Bert Davis, President and CEO, America's Black Holocaust Museum; Marcel Poletnik, Director, Milwaukee Art Museum; and Patrick Rath, President and CEO, United Performing Arts Fund. Each will give a 5-minute presentation, and then Tim Madke, CEO of MGIC and UPAF Board Chair, will moderate a panel discussion among all of them. Please use the Q&A box to submit any questions, and we will then have those questions provided to the presenters. So please welcome our first speaker, David Lee.
Thanks so much, David. So as David mentioned, I'm the CEO over at Imagine MKE. Next slide, please. We are the convener, connector, and amplifier of Milwaukee's arts and culture sector. Essentially, we are functioning like a chamber of commerce for the arts and culture sector, and we believe that arts and culture and creativity have a key role in the health and well-being of our region, in its economic health, social health, and civic health, and we're working to drive outcomes through our convening work, advocacy, and capacity building towards those ends. We formed in 2019, and just in time, right? Because the pandemic created an urgent need for our sector to have a collective voice. Next slide, please. Just to give you a sense of the scale of our sector, this is a bit of an eye chart, but I'm going to give you the highlights really quickly. This is from the National Association of State Art Agencies. And in Wisconsin, the combined arts, culture, and creative production sector added almost $11 billion to our state's economy, which represents about 3.1% of our state's GDP. Now, like many other industries, I should also note that it employs also about 100,000 people throughout the state. And our region, like many other industries, is the key driver of our state's economy for arts and cultural production. Also, like many sectors, COVID-19 basically stopped our sector, right? You heard from a little bit earlier about how we were the first to close and very likely the last to come back to business in a recognizable way as before the pandemic. I think you all know that, you know, our business, right, performing arts, cultural institutions, convening large amounts of people doesn't really function, isn't really built for 25 or 50% capacity, right? We were built for 100% capacity, full houses, sort of really connecting with people in that sort of collective experience of arts and culture. And so, compounding this problem is that Wisconsin's also last in the nation in public funding for the arts. And similarly, our city and county, we rank sort of similarly behind other peer cities. And this has affected many of our arts and culture organizations, creative businesses, and most importantly, our artists and creatives who make our place so incredible. We ran an artist relief fund. We might talk about that a little bit later. And it revealed that our city's artists and creatives are the people, right, who take care of us. They take care of our seniors. They teach our kids. They serve us in restaurants and run and check us out at the grocery store, right? They are a part not only of our creative tapestry of our city, but also the just how they make our city work. And they're by and large unseen. Next slide, please. And so we are working to better understand our sector and our artists and sort of all of the parts of this incredible creative sector in our region. In 2021, we are working to create an inventory of all of the existing data and research existing right now so that we can actually orient ourselves towards a Milwaukee region economic impact study. Right now, the slide I shared previously is only statewide. We don't have a look at Milwaukee County and city, and we want to get our ducks in a row to be able to do that study later on this year. But in the meantime, we have a lot of really great research work queued up to better understand our work as we're coming out of COVID, right? So in the first quarter, we've already launched a study with Wolf Brown to understand audience attitudes as we're coming back from COVID-19. In quarter two, we are just about to launch on an artist and creative survey to better understand how COVID has affected our city's artists and creatives and the choices that they've made because of the support or lack of support in our region. We are going to be organizing a Q3 business sector study to understand how our business sector interacts and employs and engages with the arts and creative community. And we would love to be able to partner with some of you on that as well. And then in quarter four, we're going to be looking at partners to understand how our trust and ability to move forward a common agenda, how deep and strong those connections are. So we're excited over this next year to kind of have a deeper look at our sector and the different segments of it so that we can help to create better policies and better actions for all of us to join together to move our sector forward at this very, very unique time. Next slide, please. And so finally, our 2021 priorities based on that research, right? We want to be able to ensure that we're continuing to advance shared goals. As you may know, we were launched based on a collective impact agenda. So we are continuing to bring together that group of people to ensure that we're moving towards the goals that have been outlined for the sector. We want to connect the different parts of our sector to be able to share our sector's full impact as a powerful economic player in our region's economic recovery, right? Because I think when you look at just the raw numbers, I mean, we are the nonprofit arts and culture sector puts about $250 million of spend into the economy. We're not counting the cultural festivals and many of the other creative businesses that contribute to that. And then finally, we want to be able to amplify the ways that arts, creativity, and cultural production improves and impacts public health. I think we're going to talk about in the panel about sort of aligning arts and culture with civic and county goals to ensure that we are seen as a useful partner and an important lever to address issues like health, equity, inclusion, and the important issues that are ahead of us. And just one last thought on this is that, we are at this incredible moment right now with the American Rescue Plan Act and a potential infrastructure bill to leverage a one-time generational transformative investment in Milwaukee's arts, culture, and creative sector to create a more vibrant and thriving and sustainable and inclusive ecosystem. And we hope all of our work in our 2021 will help move us down that path, and we hope you will join us. And with that, I will turn it over to my next, or I'll turn it back to, I think, David or my next presenter.
So next we will hear from Nell Montoya. You're on mute.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you very, very much. And David, thank you for that very important message that you just shared with everybody. So we're in our network essentially living what David just mentioned. There's been a huge hit to our creative community, and really what we're looking at is how do we, as we start to emerge post-blip, as I like to refer to it, as an entrusted member of the community. What are we doing to ensure that those issues such as jobs, employment, benefits, mental health, what are we doing to play our role with that? And what have we identified as reasons for us to be active at this particular state? And we too did a smaller fund this past year for our membership to make sure that they had the opportunity to put groceries on their table, buy medicine, things for their household. And it was really an eye-opener when we discovered what some of the responses were for the reason that they needed funds. But at the end of the day, what we really discovered was dignity, which has all been lost for a lot of those that are in the creative sector. Yes, they're finding, if they can, other works, but what it really means is they have to walk away from their practice, something that they've always wanted to maintain or hold on to. It's become very difficult, especially if they have loved ones or family members that rely on their income. So what we've been doing here at Marn over the last year and through the pandemic has been two things. One, we forged forward with creating a new brick and mortar facility, an art and culture hub, where we hope to bring people in. We're looking at our various activation programming that we're going to be looking at so that we can bring folks back here into the facility. But also, how do we go and provide opportunity? And that's, again, something that we're really looking at. And one of those areas that we're looking at, besides the facility that I'm in today, is bringing artists back into what we all understand as being that first, I believe, level of that barometer that shows that our communities are, in fact, coming back alive. We're seeing that the opportunities that are available to them, which are limited, are very, very important. So again, what we're doing is looking at the lens that we've been historically looking at for an organization such as ours. We've reevaluated all of the programming that we've done, and we're looking at a more inclusive look into how we can be a trusted member of the community. We have developed, for example, a new office, which is the Office of Cultural Transformation and Public Engagement. And this is an extremely high level position. In fact, it sits just below mine on our org chart. And again, what we're looking at is how we approach opportunities for the creative community, how we are represented within our organization. But at the end of the day, what it's all about are two different things. One I mentioned earlier, and one is dignity. But David touched on this briefly, and that was, we're seeing that this is a healing measure. This is a really critical part of a subject of mental health and public health and well-being. So we understand the importance of arts and culture. And what we're going to continue to do is find those paths. We're going to work those different elements. So as we activate and as we start to bring folks into our new facility here, that they see that in fact they are being represented and that what they are looking to represent is on display. So those are some of the basic elements of what an organization such as ours is doing. We are happy to be at the table, for example, with Imagine MKE and at the statewide level as well. This is going to be critical. We're going to see how well we are doing in the next very few months. We're going to see, and I think a lot of folks are looking at organizations such as ours and what UPAF's groups are doing to reinvigorate, to start this economy back up. So you have economics, you have health, you have the well-being of our community, And we're excited to be there. It's been very tough. It's been very, very difficult for us all, but we're happy to lead the way best we can here in our new location. And we're looking forward to what we believe is going to be a new turning point for us as a community. And that's where we currently are here in 2021. So thank you for the opportunity for me to share a few thoughts from our organization. And I thank you very much for being part of this great conversation. I look forward to participating in the panel a little bit later on in the program. So thank you.
Thank you, Mal. And now we'll hear from Bert Davis.
Thanks, David. It's always good to, can you guys hear me? I want to make sure that I'm not muted, am I? No, okay. I just want to say thanks, David, and look forward to sharing some information at a national level first. So I'm fortunate enough to sit on what is called the American Alliance of Museums. And that is the umbrella and membership organization for all museums of any kind, whether it's arts or cultural, botanical gardens, you name it. And so I want to share some information and give us kind of like a broad perspective of what the impact of COVID-19 museums. So I currently serve as the president and CEO of America's Black Holocaust Museum. And for perspective, for those of you who don't know, America's Black Holocaust Museum was founded by Dr. James Cameron, who has been celebrated and distinguished as being one of the few people to survive a public lynching in 1930 at the age of 16 in Marion, Indiana. He is the only person to write a book about it, and the only person to actually found the museum, which he started in his basement in the early 70s, came to fruition at its current location in 1988. Unfortunately, Dr. Cameron died in 2006, and with the confluence of his passing and the recession of 2008, the museum closed. So I'm very, very happy and fortunate to come back. I was here before as the president and CEO of the Zoological Society, and came back in 2019, and we're hoping to reemerge and reopen the museum sometime this year. So I just wanted to share a little bit of data that continues to kind of demonstrate where we are as organizations. So AAM queried about 900 museums around the country. And here's some of the results as it relates to the closures, reopening, and visitation. So just to give you a broad kind of understanding of what institutions come under the umbrella, which are all from zoos and aquariums to science centers, nature centers, and natural history centers. The largest respondents were historical society and what people designate as history centers, historic sites, general museums, children museums, art museums, and botanical gardens. And of these, here are some facts around where these museums were pre-COVID, but primarily after COVID. So nearly 100%, 98% of all museums closed at some point after COVID. Roughly about 3/4 of the museums believe that 70% are closed. Almost 100% feel that they will reopen, but will be drastically underfunded. The target date for reopening is varied. Most have no idea when they're going to be able to reopen. 100% of the museums responded that they know that they will not open at full capacity. And at least 50% of those museums who said they will try to reopen, 50% of them said that they have no idea when they are going to be able to open at full capacity. And I think David Lee talked about that our cultural institutions were designed to be at 100% capacity. And so right now, I think they are somewhere between 25 and 50%, depending upon what city and what municipality you live in. Everybody's institution closed. 100% of the museums that were queried closed in April. about 20% of them tried to reopen during the summer, and everyone closed again during November of last year. This is going to be really important, and that is changes in the visitation, which unfortunately, many of our institutions are dependent upon visitation and membership to survive. 35% of them are saying that they are never going to have the normal attendance that they had before, based on that they had to do staff layoffs, the type of staff that they had to lay off. 38% of the respondents reported that they've had total demographic changes in terms of visitation. Now, this actually cuts two ways, which we can talk about further during the panel discussion. What we've seen is that most of our visitors are local and tend to be younger now, have more access to capital. But what we're seeing through our programming is that now that all of our programming is virtual, whereby if we had a program at our cultural institution, whether it's the zoo or the museum, the art museum, typically it'd be people that are coming in from the state of Wisconsin, maybe the north part of Illinois. Now through the virtual space, we are getting people from Europe. We're getting people from South America because they virtually can now, they can join. So it still cuts both ways, and we're still trying to figure out how we garner the best monetary positioning for this change, because quite frankly, this trend is not going to be a trend. It is going to be a mode of operation for us in the future. And that is, we know that we're not going to be able to have the capacity to bring people to our organizations like we did before. Unfortunately, the largest layoffs were in the guest services, which you can imagine. And this has really hit many of our museums that, once again, we, as I said before, depend on visitation to be a primary driver for revenues. Almost 70% have had to cut back on programming because of budget shortfalls. And 50% of those organizations feel that because they've had to lay off so much staff or furlough staff, that they will never be at their educational capacity again, which is one of the fundamental premises of a cultural institution. So you can see the dichotomy that we find ourselves in. Museums by design are, we create these exhibits, we interpret culture and life through educational programming. Okay, thanks, David. If we in fact use this one fundamental function, there's going to be a lot of despair. I will end with a couple of statistics as relates to a third of our museums feel that they will open, but will have to close. This is very significant for museums of color. There's an old adage, if white America sneezes, Black America gets a cold. And so we've done some initial research with the African American Museum Association, and we're looking at close to 40 to 45% of all Black museums in the country will not be able to reopen. This is extraordinarily important for how we're going to need to be lean and how we're going to need to change the basic model of how we operate, which is something I can touch on during the panel discussion. So with that, I will turn it back over to David, and thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, Bert, thank you very much. And now we hear from Marcel Plednick from Milwaukee Art Museum.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be with you. So I recognize, and certainly the Milwaukee Art Museum is not immune to a lot of the challenges that Bert just described. But for today, I really wanted to focus on what the bright spots were in the last year and a half, because I think that's what's going to carry the day. That's certainly my hope. So let me start with just the fundamentals. Next slide, please. All right, so this is sort of what happened, right? The Milwaukee Art Museum closed in March of 2020. We started working on reopening plans even without knowing when we would reopen. We reopened to visitors for the first time in July of 2020. We did all this work to refresh our first floor and East End, and then we had to close again in November and reopened for the second time in March of 2021. In the meantime, and I'll touch on this in a moment, we hired 2 great key leaders for the organization. Now, moving past March, we're now gearing up for June of this year to open the first exhibition post-COVID that the museum will host, a wonderful show called Americans in Spain. I'll also talk about the Lakeside at MAM experience that we're planning to open at the same time. And then our expectation at this moment in time is that we will reopen the remainder of the museum in July of this year. So that's just sort of the groundwork, if you will. Next slide, please. My staff loves that I start every meeting with a quote. This is one of my favorites. Don't count the days, make the days count. This was sort of a personal motto via Muhammad Ali, the Great, that I really felt was important for us to adopt as a staff as we were going through this crisis. And so when you translate it to museum practice, what does that mean? Next slide. It really means asking the fundamental question, how do we harness this crisis to learn, to grow, and to accelerate change? These were the things that I wanted to hear about from staff every single day. This is what I pushed myself to think about, and I have some great wins to share with you today. So next slide, please. The first thing we did is we embraced experiments. So we talked about the fact that we were making COVID lemonade every day. What are the things that COVID allows us to do that we may not have done before, but that we feel we have an opportunity or an imperative to do at this moment? So the first of which, next slide, please, of course, concerns the COVID-19 safety protocols themselves, because at the time that we were planning to reopen the museum in March of 2020, no one had developed a full-scaled COVID-19 safety protocol. No museum around the country. Businesses were in the process of creating those protocols, but nobody was finished. And so the Milwaukee Art Museum was one of the first museums in the country to develop a complete set of COVID-19 protocols. Next slide. And those included things that we now all love and take for granted. Time ticketing, the fact that we had a visitor code of conduct, which really underscored all of the things that we were expecting from our visitors. Mandatory masking, even before masks were mandatory in the city of Milwaukee. Retail in Windover Hall, food and beverage outside, and then a one-way path through our first floor galleries. Sanitizer stations, and something that's very antithetical to standard ways of museum business, and that is having the cleaning and sanitation crew in the facility very present during open hours. When you think about museums, you know that most of the time, pre-COVID, the facilities get cleaned before and after the visitors are in the building, because you don't necessarily want visitors to feel like they're watching the way the sausage is made, right? So of course we flipped that on its head because we knew that we would encourage visitors to feel safe in the facility if we actually turn this around. Next slide, please. Like every museum around the country, and Bert also alluded to this, digital innovation was really key, and it allowed the museum to accelerate much of the work that was already on our sightlines. Flipping the switch and making programs virtual, doing even online learning for young students who were being schooled at home and couldn't come in for school tours to the museum. Everything that we had been wanting to do in the next 3 years, we ended up doing in the first 3 weeks of being closed as a museum. So it really did allow us to accelerate the pace of changes that we were already hoping to make. Next slide, please. We also, and you're seeing a very behind the scenes moment because this work isn't completed yet, we finally made a push to move the museum's store from its current location to a more front and center location in Windover Hall. So this is the NML suite at the museum. And you can scroll through the next 3 slides, please, just to give everyone a sense of what that's going to look like. You can see here what visitors will experience as they enter the store. The store itself is going to look much more like a work of art and feel much more airy and open than it did before. So that too feels like a large improvement from our perspective in terms of the visitor experience. Next slide, please. We also, of course, recalled in the days of COVID that the museum has this extraordinary campus that stretches the lakefront. And so for this summer, we're planning a Lakeside at MAM series of experiences, which will allow visitors not just to the museum, but to the lakefront itself to experience the grounds. We're setting up for picnics, outdoor programming. The Coles Art Studio for Children is going to move outside, and we're going to offer food and beverage amenities outdoors as well. So again, really promoting the outdoor experience at the museum, which, by the way, is something we've never done before. Next slide. We also, as I mentioned, decided to make 2 pivotal hires for the museum deep in the throes of the COVID crisis. Next slide. Rob Stein, our Deputy Director and Chief Experience Officer, and Dr. Kantara Souffrant, our Curator of Community Dialogue. Both positions were key for our strategic direction and our plan. Rob is the rock star of all things digital in the museum world, and so we're very excited to welcome him to the Milwaukee Art Museum and help us shape the next generation of museum experiences. And Dr. Souffrant is really an expert in community organizing and thinking about relationships that can be built for the museum and with the museum for the community at large. So both of these individuals started remotely working at the Milwaukee Art Museum in January of 2021. Next slide, please. We also doubled down on building connections with authenticity and purpose. And we began that in an interesting way through our new marketing campaign. Next slide, please. We actually spent time interviewing the people who came to the museum the most. And here is our first group of Milwaukee Art Museum superfans. What we wanted to know was why they came and what they experienced at the museum and why it was important in their lives. Next slide, please. And what emerged was a new series of narratives that didn't put the museum front and center, but rather the people who used and visited and benefited from the museum. And so you'll start seeing the results of this campaign around town in the next couple of weeks. Next slide. Here's a look at the behind the scenes of photography that was done at the museum. And it's fun to see this because, of course, in the final images, you don't get a sense of the fact that our visitors were actually in the space. Next slide. Here's an example of what you might see in the marketplace, really large ads that focus on, again, the experience of these specific individuals, all of whom are part of the fabric of Milwaukee community. Final slide here on this topic. And then if you go on our website, you'll actually be able to go a little bit further and hear directly from them about their experience, who they are, what they love about the museum. One of the things that we learned going through the COVID-19 crisis is that there is no substitute for what the Milwaukee Art Museum provides for our community. And I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes from a visitor who came to the museum when we first reopened in the summer of 2020. Next slide. I wasn't prepared for the tears. And I was grateful that the guards and staff who witnessed my puddles in every room were gracious and kind. And then I got to my Rothenberg. These were the kinds of remarks that we heard from visitors time and time again after we opened for the first time and then the second time. And so we really made a commitment during this COVID year and a half. Next slide. We firmly believe that community is everything. Next slide. That art makes us whole. And then finding the relationship between those things, next slide, is what defines us. And we doubled down on our commitment to redefining art museum and what that means for Milwaukee and nationwide. All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, Marcel, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I love the new campaign.
Thanks, David. Yeah, very excited about it too.
All right, so now we hear from Patrick Rath from UPath. Patrick?
Thank you, David. I appreciate the time today. I want to extend my appreciation as well to Julia Taylor, who cannot be with us. She conceived of this very important topic as a time that's going to show the healing of the Milwaukee community and how important the arts are to bring us all back together. And so I thank her. I thank the membership for their focus on what we're trying to do right now to bring this community back stronger than ever. So I have just a few slides that I want to share with you today. around the performing arts community, and specifically what the United Performing Arts Fund members, our 14 wonderful organizations, are doing to bring us together, and to bring us together in some very substantial ways that'll make us much better for the future. On to our first slide, please. Some of the quotes that Greg Wesley, and appreciate Greg's fantastic time as co-chair for this year, along with Steve Johnson and Heather Dunn, as we're working to really advance as much community support as possible for our member organizations. They have faced in very difficult times, but they have always stayed focused to their mission and always made sure that their presence was felt throughout the entire community. We talked a minute ago about the $23 million of ticket purchases of people who would have been in those seats, enjoying those times together with family, that have been lost during this past year. We talked about the local artists who are so core to producing not only what we see on stage, but providing all those educational activities that make our lives whole, that does so much for our students and our seniors and beyond. But one thing that is really striking us right now is that 2/3 of the UPAF member organizations have less than 10% of their operating expenses as cash on hand. They have taken some very difficult measures to say, we're going to focus on mission. Their boards of directors have made great choices there, but it meant diving into those reserves and using the unrestricted funds that they had to keep those programs whole going forward. And we'll reflect on that in just a minute as we go forward. Next slide, please. So the innovation, what Marcel was talking about, it's been here in great measure with the performing arts as well. From First Stage Academy, who pivoted early on once we shut down in March of last year to make sure that their programming activities were virtual. They have devised new ways in which they're now helping people create almost their own journeys to be interactive in their experiences with the performing arts in a way that really duplicates what they were experiencing on stage. And quite frankly, going beyond that, because it's really helping people connect and build that self-esteem for all of those young children. The rep, Our Home to Your Home, and what they've been really doing to stand up so much as we look at our focus on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. They have been hallmarks in our entire community in standing up, saying this is a topic that we all stand for, that we've always stood for, and that we are going to be better as a result of that. And case in point, just this past week, the Milwaukee Repertory Theater was awarded as the inaugural recipients of the Governor's Tourism Award for Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion. Quite an honor for that wonderful institution, what they've done to really make this a focus in all of their programming and the importance of that of bringing and connecting our community. And last but not least, Milwaukee Ballet's Nutcracker Short and Sweet. They said, this is a holiday tradition for so many. Let's bring people together. We know we can only have a handful of people in the new Baumgartner Center for Dance, but importantly, we're going to have this streamed and available for all so they can experience it with their loved ones. And thanks to funding through UPAF's Casey's Fund, which was stood up last year to really break down those barriers, they were able to do that and invest in high quality visual and audio opportunities to really make it feel as if you were there live in those experiences. Next slide. That innovation as well made sure that we had an opportunity to make sure every audience, every person, that accessibility was created in all that we did. The Milwaukee Chamber Theater, along with working with partners like Black Arts MKE and the Bronzeville Arts Ensemble, had their Milwaukee Black Theater Festival in a way to connect more people than ever before to what's happening and the importance of Black theater in our community. Skylight Music Theater, having had many plans to put in place things that were in person. As we heard from Dr. Weston before, things changed in October, November, and they had to pivot quickly, and they moved to having the first of their kind of this interactive and online full-length musical. And of course, the MSO with the Bradley Symphony Center, having to look at their schedule and their calendar a little bit differently as they reimagined going from singular performances into small ensembles and eventually to a full orchestral experience. They have done a fantastic work to make sure that not only is that experience now available for many people in the community, but also can be streamed live. Their first experience of this back in February, more than 3,000 homes tuned in to have that experience of the new Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra in their brand new Symphony Hall. Next slide, please. I'm just going to pause here for a moment because I think many of my colleagues on this call right now and our panelists feel the same. And while this says the performing arts, I think it extends to the performing arts and the visual arts and how important that is to connect us through empathy, through grace, through joy, through understanding. These are all things that are very human nature for us and that we find a way through the arts to connect. And it's something that we need now more than ever as we've been so disconnected for now more than 14 months. Next slide. So how are we looking in Milwaukee? I heard from Dr. Bert Davis talking a little bit further about what we're seeing in the museum space. Very similar things are happening in terms of the performing arts space across the country. So Milwaukee, though, is certainly a leader in every respect as we come back. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see what's happening nationwide. And thanks for the Americans for the Arts. This is new information that we received as of last week. And this is what over 90,000 performing arts organizations have come together to say what's happening in their environments. What's happening right now is that a third of organizations are saying that we can open at some point in 2021. 41% of those nonprofit performing arts organizations are saying they do not have the resources to restart in-person programming anytime soon. And 1 in 6 are saying they will not return ever again. In Milwaukee, it's a much different story. All of our Youth Path member organizations will be performing and educating in person in 2021. Many have already started and many are coming back. One of the main reasons for this is the fantastic contributed support, both directly to those organizations, as well as the United Performing Arts Fund that provided a base level support month after month to keep the cash flow going and to keep those mission focused entities on path and available to as many people as possible. And this is going to help us come back better than most cities across our entire country. With that, on the next slide, we do have to realize that some of this is grounded in reality, but there's also a fallacy as we keep saying that we're welcoming back and glad to have in-person performances. We have great organizations such as the Florentine Opera Company, and what they've just done over the last month has been a wonderful example of song and connecting people through that art form. However, they're not able to do it on the grand scale that they typically do. They have to do it in minimal staging and minimal artists on stage. Milwaukee Ballet, again, is performing, looking forward to bring more and more people back, but they have to do so in a very safe format for their artists as well as for those who work behind the curtain. And last but not least, Milwaukee Rep on the far right-hand side, that's a production that they're just doing right now of Ella. They have a wonderful venue, obviously at the Quadracci Theater. That facility, though, is only utilizing 180 seats at the most, as they put in all the proper protocols that have been referenced by Marcel from the Art Museum standpoint, are there full for our venues as well. And just to that point, I will say that each of the performing arts venues in the Milwaukee area has instituted the latest in MERV air exchange technology. And they've also done many things to ensure that as people come in, they can feel as safe as possible. But what this has meant is that the social distancing that we have right now is that less than 20% of our facilities can be used. And I think it was referenced by David Lee in the front hand. We have to have 100% of our facility capability to really make the business models work. Right now, I can walk in a Walgreens store that has 113 people who can come in, but I go across the street to the Bradley Symphony Center and only 229 people can come in at this point in time and experience that facility. And that is due to what we have as social distancing. The best way for us to fight this is through vaccinations. We've been partnering together with healthymke.com that was referenced before and the good people at the Medical College of Wisconsin. We want to see vaccinations rise significantly, but we also need to look at the science and start saying, can we reduce some of the social distancing? Because we are mask wearing, because we have all the good filtration in place, and because vaccination rates are rising, we need to see that so we can come back more fully and our economic models can help us get to that next future. And with the fact that our unrestricted reserves are going to be depleted very, very quickly if we do not. Next slide and last slide for us. So this idea of disruption, it has happened to us. We've been resilient, we've weathered through this, and we have built so well in this community. And thanks to the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that has been generated and donated by so many of those who are on the call today and others in the community. The new Milwaukee Ballet's Baumgartner Center for Dance, the expansions of the Milwaukee Youth Arts Center, and last but not least, the Bradley Symphony Center. These are great assets, but because of the time frame that we've had now due to COVID, we haven't experienced the full potential. Sorry, I think I got muted there for a minute. With that, I just want to make one last call to action. Obviously, those entities are going to help us come back stronger than ever and really bring people downtown in droves. But the essentials as we look at for our performing arts community and beyond, any gift that can be made, we know cash is king. It's going to help our organizations continue to be solvent and move forward and continue the mission work that's so vital. We want to attract, retain, and lift up artists of all backgrounds, especially our Black and Brown artists who are so critical to what our future will be in our community and the conversations we need to have. We want to expand our revenues. We want to look beyond what we've done right now, look at the virtual opportunities and much more to make sure that we have a status that is going to make sure that our business is not just about being on stage. And those organizations that have done the best really have a multi-pronged approach to earned revenue. We want to be open to cost sharing and make sure that when we look at the infrastructure that we have, we want to build leaner and we want to build smarter. We've learned that through this pandemic, and we want to make sure we're more collaborative on how we do that. Recapitalize the sector is going to be very important as well. We have lost so much in terms of that unrestricted revenue that's been there for those rainy days. Well, it has been pouring for us. We've used it to make sure we can continue on that mission, but it's going to take some effort to come back. And last but not least, our call to service. And my point, just add one more. The member groups of the United Performing Arts Fund, those 14 wonderful organizations, as well as UPAF, we have over 100 businesses that are represented with at least one member of their business on a UPAF member board. But having 2 or more, that number trails off significantly. So we're going to ask our leadership of the Greater Milwaukee Committee, as well as beyond, to consider adding one more from your leadership team. It's a great time to get involved, to bring back and to see our community come back stronger than ever. And we need that leadership now more than ever. So on behalf of the United Performing Arts Fund, thank you for your time, and I look forward to the panel conversation.
So Patrick, thank you very much. And now I'll turn it over to Tim Madke from MGIC to moderate the panel.
Sure. Thanks, David. And again, I want to thank all the panelists for all the great work you do in the city, and hearing each of you talk, I think reminds us of the treasures that we have in Milwaukee, and now looking forward to getting back. I think we got just under 20 minutes here. So we'll try to go a little rapid fire, maybe ask probably 2 of you to answer each of the questions I have, and hopefully try to spread it around. But if obviously you have something you feel like you really want to add in, don't hesitate. So maybe I'll start off with the first question with Bert and Marcel, and probably start with Bert first. But thinking about how people are connecting in different ways and utilizing different creative outlets and mediums, what did the pandemic reveal as new opportunities for your industry organization?
Well, thanks a lot, Tim. And once again, just hello and a quick shout out to all of our panelists. And, this could literally be like an afternoon worth of conversation. So we'll try to cram this in as much as possible. So what it did for us and what it's doing for the overall museum community is we typically are like the promulgators of educational programming about subject matter, right? So it's a Monet or it's slavery. What this pandemic has done, and then the subsequent loss of life from Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, is that it has converted the thinking of people who work in museums and cultural institutions to become more socially active, actually be conveners of some of these very difficult conversations. And so the vision of the museum, quite frankly, is our mission is to create this awareness of disparities which have come to fore, right, because of COVID and because of George Floyd. But then our vision is to provide opportunities for people to just have these discussions, feel respected, feel as if they could say what they need to say. And so what we've been doing is we've had several book clubs, and I can tell you that 75 to 80% of the participants in 4 book clubs since COVID have been white. They are dying to have this conversation about how they did not know. And there was this situation in the Black community where we were kind of upset with our white colleagues there for a minute. Like, how could you not know? Every Black person that is born in America knows this. How could you not know? And it evolved from that conversation to, okay, we don't know what you don't know. We've evolved in these communities. It's our job to help. So I've had my neighbor come to me in tears saying, I know you run this museum. I need help in understanding this. And we've created a series of conversations to help people with that. So that's what has come to the biggest light for us, and how the museum can play a role in this social construct in helping our fellow citizens understand the plight of African American, Black and brown people in the United States.
Thank you. Marcel, how about for the Art Museum?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. So I wanted to give you a serious example, then a kind of funny one, but I'll make it brief. The serious one has more to do with when the museum was closed, of course, and Bert pointed this out too. You see the influx of participation from a much wider net online and through digital programming. One of the things that we found was that we were serving a different population, even in Milwaukee, online versus those who were actually coming to the museum. And so that made us recognize that we really needed not only what we call, high stakes levels of contact, meaning come in, get a ticket, walk through the galleries, but also we needed to continue low stakes points of contact with our community. And that's how the idea of Lakeside at MAM was born, that you could be on the lakefront. You didn't need to enter into a negotiation or transaction with the museum. You could just enjoy an amenity that the museum had to offer. And that was a way to start building a relationship. So that's sort of the serious example. The funny example is that, of course, since right now we have a dedicated one-way path through the galleries, we're essentially forcing people to go and experience the museum a certain way. And as a result, all of them are finding new things to delight in that they didn't even know that the museum had. Trustees all the way on down. And so as I was visiting the museum on Friday and we're deliberating when to get rid of the one-way path, they said, no, but the problem is if we get rid of the one-way path, then they won't see all the things that we need them to see. So that's the more humorous example, but it is sort of a takeaway that we've learned. We're wrestling with that one, I will say.
No, but that makes sense. It's like the sale rack in retail. You put in the back of the store, right, to make sure everybody walks through everything else.
Exactly. That's right.
Well, thanks for that. We'll move on. Next question, maybe Patrick, some thoughts from you on funds and grants, created obviously during the pandemic to help artists out. But beyond the financial constraints, what do you think the impact's been on our arts organizations in Milwaukee? And how is the community, the benefits from those experiences, how have those changed?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Tim. I think what we see right now is we had to look at this COVID timeframe. It wasn't a linear timeframe. It was really this different phases, and we've seen that through the caseloads that were there as well. So we've had to have different reactions at different times. So there was investment that was made back in September and October saying we're coming back and we're looking forward to coming back. And that was reassuring to so many artists. They were looking forward to that. And all of a sudden that changed so very quickly. And it's now obviously continued for the last 8 months with a very different path. So there were great things stood up by Imagine MKE, and I know David will probably speak to that when they had opportunities for artists to be paid directly. I'm really proud of the UPATH member groups where they said, we're going to keep as many of our artists whole. We're going to bring them on staff to continue the educational activities, to continue preparing and planning as we go forward into the future. I will say that they're continuing to do rolling furloughs at different times here because they have to find ways to control their expenses. And they've moved actually to almost quarterly budgeting and review to make sure that they are never out of sync from what their cash flows are currently. And it's a very difficult thing. So when we look at my final point will be on those production schedules. It takes a lot of time for us to build the contracts, to work with the unions, to plan effectively for what needs to be put in place, and then essentially bring all those artists to come together to rehearse and to prepare. These are all capital needs up front before anything you see on stage. And this is where that question is right now. If we can't come together and be shoulder to shoulder in a theater, we can't find that economic model that's going to work. So we want more artists to come back and perform live. But until some of those things are fixed, that capital outlay is not going to be at that same level. So the artists right now, they're struggling. We love them. We love that they've been staying dedicated and doing so much more in the community than ever before. We owe it to them. We owe it to them to bring them back strong, still continue to say Milwaukee is their place as we go forward.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, and taking it, I guess, from sort of the organizational level and maybe focusing on the individual artists themselves, maybe David and Mal, I'll get you to chime in a little bit with both of you working with artists. What's their experience been as individuals during this past year? David, maybe I'll have you go first.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. It's been really scary. We stood up our first artist relief fund back in March on March 13th, so before the shutdown actually happened, recognizing that our sort of sector's constituency, right, the individual artists would be the first ones out of jobs, given that events were beginning to be canceled at that point. In that first round of Artist Relief Fund, we raised about $200,000 and funded about 400 artists in that time, in about 6 weeks, in small micro grants. And what we found in reading all of these applications, as I mentioned at the open, is that our city's artists and creatives are highly vulnerable. highly entrepreneurial, and also work in many of our institutions, right? Not only the performing arts institutions and arts organizations, but also many of our city and regions like favorite bars, restaurants, cafes, and other corporations, right? And I think when you look at this group that is highly entrepreneurial, highly educated, and also possess the key characteristics of creativity and ingenuity, which are I think the characteristics that our region's businesses are recruiting for. I think we're in a very precipitous time as people potentially are potentially looking at other places to move to for support or being able to be with family, to be able to weather through this time. And so I think what we've learned, right, is that this population is incredibly vulnerable. And for a city and region that has, such an incredible arts community, to not have a standing relief fund for artists who get into some trouble, whether it's a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, or potentially just a car crash, right, or some financial emergency, we feel is a real problem that needs to be addressed in our community. And we hope to be working with folks like Mal at Marn and others to figure out how we align all of our resources to ensure that we have a standing relief fund so that our region's sort of key human resource capital, right, which is our people, feel supported enough to be able to stay, continue to work, and continue to provide value to our to not only our region's arts and culture production, but also just all of our businesses and other institutions alike.
Thanks, Matt. Would you like to add anything?
Sure. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, David. I've kind of characterized this as a canceled class, canceled as in past tense culture, and that you really do, when you dive into it, take a look at just how far-reaching the effect of the pandemic has been, especially on the arts community and then the subgroups within the various ethnic minority groups, et cetera. But, the lost opportunities that are there. So we did a similar, certainly not on the scale of what Imagine MKE did, but we pulled from our internal funds and did put together a COVID relief fund for our membership. And yes, we too managed to have a tremendous opportunity to gain insight as to where the need was. And so you have a class that's canceled, but then you think about it. Those students also are reaching out to elderly. They're reaching out to adults with disabilities. They're reaching out to school children. All of these programs get affected. So that domino effect down the rail there is really what we found, and that's really where it was an eye opener. Yes, we certainly wish we could have had more funding, but what we were able to do was extremely helpful on a smaller scale, of course. But folks, it's just imperative that we understand just how far-reaching what it is that this group, at least within the arts community, is doing right now, and how badly it is needed. And that disparate number that David alluded to earlier, between on an economic level, just on that front alone, what arts and culture means to communities, whether it be job recruitment, just building communities, versus what comes back into our communities in the form of grants. That number is just too far-reaching, and we have to find a way to manage that and fix that and get there. And hopefully we'll start to move in that direction. I'm kind of looking at it as a very large wheel, and it was spinning in the other direction. So we're slowly getting it to stop. And I think between us, we can actually maybe get it moving back in the other direction. And that's my hope as we move forward into 2021.
Thank you. I appreciate those thoughts. I guess moving a little bit different direction. Bert, you had touched on it a little bit earlier. On top of the pandemic, we obviously had a lot of the racial disparities come to the forefront and injustice with George Floyd. Just trying to think about it. You mentioned having your neighbor come to you and saying they needed help. But from a museum standpoint, how do you view that you've been able to sort of help in the dialogue and the discourse to really bring people along and educate them as we went through the racial equity conversations on top of everything going on with the pandemic?
Oh, great question. So a couple of things have happened, and these things have happened nationally, but this is what has happened with us locally. So in the chat, Marcel and I are talking about the fact that I know Rob Stein from AAM, and he is a digital wizard. And Dr. Kantara called me and said one of the first organizations she wants to work with is American Black Holocaust Museum. And so I think one of the fundamental things that's going to help us across the board as it relates to the financial capital that David and Mel were talking about in terms of our individuals, the human resource capital, all the way through what we need is financial sustainability, which Patrick talked about in terms of Milwaukee feeling confident about reopening at some point, because you've got this kind of safety net, which is UPAV, and many cities don't have that. What we've seen is the whole notion of partnerships has come into play. So Dr. Ellen Sinsky from the Public Museum reached out to me and said, Dr. Bert, you know, we want to bring the Nelson Mandela exhibit. And she started going down. I said, stop. You had me in Mandela, right? I don't care what it is. You guys are bringing something about Nelson Mandela to Milwaukee. We're in. And it has helped us, and it will continue to help us. It helped them because she was very honest with me and said, you know, we are a lot of white people here who don't know how to penetrate and permeate and connect to the community. And this exhibit is so important. This is the first US city to have this exhibit. It's the only exhibit in the entire world that is sanctioned by the Mandela family. And we don't want to miss the opportunity of connecting Milwaukee, especially with all of these disparities that we keep getting. And so it was this perfect storm of, we will do whatever we need to help you with the development of this 50-person community advisory group, which is very diverse, very vocal. They have grown and understood how their programming needs to facilitate that. It's helped us, and because it's helped us to continue to be part of the programming space, even though we're not open yet. And it's also helped us, and then I'll end with this because I don't want to talk too much longer. We've gotten unsolicited donations from donors who normally would have us to write a grant, right? And they were like, no grant, here's a check. Because you're in this space, we need you in this space. And we need you to work and help with other organizations. And so partnership, I think, is going to be our salvation on all of these fronts, because we will have more strength and more power in terms of raising funds. But then we can cross-fertilize and cross-pollinate all of these great programs that we're used to doing. And we've been islands in doing this, but now it necessitates that we not be islands anymore, and that we share our common wealth and we create programs that will benefit the community.
Thank you. I think we've got just under 5 minutes left. So I'm going to try to get a couple more questions, but the first one to Patrick, and then we'll wrap up with the last one. But Patrick, I think, you know, understanding what everyone's went through in the last year, how do the arts factor into Milwaukee's future, and what should we expect from this sector in addressing Milwaukee's important issues?
Well, thank you for that, Tim. You know, first and foremost, just what I reflected on at the end there, the amount of generosity that came into the arts community to build up these wonderful new facilities that we have now from the performing arts perspective. It's also happening as we see the Milwaukee Public Museum, as Bert just referenced, in the partnership there. All of these are investments saying we want people to be in our community, to come out and experience what we have. Just last week, Greg Marcus was sharing that as he looked at his staff and what they were saying and this recovery that they're all yearning for, they were so excited when they saw people back in the bar at the St. Kate Hotel. The reason they were there is because the rep just started performing in person and people were coming there to experiencing the activities in downtown Milwaukee. So, you know, I think we're going to learn very much from the onset of what we've taken from a digital standpoint to create more accessibility, expand to more audiences, have a bigger footprint, break down more of those barriers. But how we come together, how we better reflect as a community to have some of those conversations and experiences. We need to utilize these assets that have been invested in, invest in our artists, have them have more opportunities than ever before. So as we look at that future, I think Dr. Davis and others have reflected so well what we need to do on the racial equity front and beyond. But just the experience of being together is so very valid as we take these next steps in these next several months.
Thank you. I guess the last question, I'll steer this to Bert and Marcel. Think about reopening plans and how do you think about reopening? Patrick, I think alluded to, you know, we had a little bit of a false start last fall when people want to open, quite frankly, right? And money went into that planning. Now we're in a situation where things seem to be getting better, but there's no certainty, obviously, in this world. So I guess I'll have to ask Bert first and then have Marcel follow on. What are your reopening plans? And do you have a vaccination plan, anything like that for personnel that you're considering?
So before I do that, I want to say, Patrick, not only the rep is bringing people to the St. K, but that pizza place there is phenomenal. Their Neapolitan style pizza is, woo, pièce de résistance. So yes, so for the America's Black Holocaust Museum, we were planning to try to open during the DNC, because what better time to utilize the fact that you've got, 60,000 people coming, generating, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, and then COVID hit. And so because of that, we had to remain closed because we lost 2 of our major vendors because of COVID. And so they still had 3 exhibits to fabricate and install. So everything went to a screeching halt. So a year ago, we had a very, very small staff, very small bandwidth, and we all started working from home. What I believe this is going to create as a model for us, and then probably more of a national and international model. And this has also been demonstrated over in China when they had one of the first SARS outbreaks. And a lot of their museums had to change their models, their financial struggles and planning. And that is, we're going to remain very small. The word lean is there. What saved us? I mean, in 2020, we actually finished that year in the black. And that was because we had 3 people on staff and a boatload of consultants. And that's going to have to probably be the model for smaller budget museums and cultural institutions and art facilities, because they're the days of having, I mean, there were some zoos and aquariums that were losing $30 million in a 9-month period, because as you can imagine, an art museum, you could just close your door, Marcel, and that's it. A zoo, you got to feed the animals. So you are always somebody's got to go there, right? And so I think the model, Tim, is going to be lean and mean, have a cadre of consultants that can come in that are dedicated to your mission, and then your overhead is low, but the functionality is still there. And that's what has helped us as a museum, and that's going to be our model. We're not going to be, I went from having 70 employees at the zoo to now 3, and I may just have 3 for the next 2 years, and that's just what it is, and a bunch of consultants. So those are my final thoughts on the financial sustainability of our institutions.
Thank you. And Marcel, what reopening plans for the art museum?
Yeah, so let me say first thing, because I had to laugh when Bert was saying we're not the zoo. Actually, we're kind of like the zoo. This is the biggest comparison I will ever make to the Milwaukee Art Museum being like a zoo. But we care for the works of art that are part of our permanent collection all day, every day, whether we're working, whether it's open to the public or not. So security, 24/7, 365 days a year, conservators coming in, registrars coming in, art handlers coming in, none of that has stopped during the pandemic. Okay. So that's important because we do have a stewardship mission. We don't have to feed the works, thank God, but we still have to take care of them. So in terms of our reopening plans, we're really looking at a very gradual model. So right now, only the first floor of the museum is open. We'll add an exhibition in June. We'll see how it goes, hopefully open more square footage to our visitors. We're a much leaner organization than we were in February of 2020. And we're building back responsibly as we get the funds. And I think the more success stories we have, the more opportunities we have to get people excited and to make sure that the funding is there for us to do some of this work. And the other thing I will say is building endowments, which is something that historically in Milwaukee hasn't always been a popular topic, is the key to how you weather a global pandemic as an institution. Every organization that we want to survive, not just for tomorrow, but for the next 100 years, needs to have a stronger endowment. And that includes the Milwaukee Art Museum.
I just want to chime in, Tim, because I didn't finish the answer. Number one, Marcel is absolutely right. Over 50% of all the museums in the country right now say that they can't last. They only have enough funding to sustain themselves for 6 months, right? So the endowment isn't huge. I didn't answer the final question because I got so caught up into this financial model. We are looking to have a huge celebration for our 33rd anniversary during Juneteenth. And then we're looking to open sometime late 2021, sometime in the fall. So we are working through that. And the same thing, limited capacity, all the parameters that all the other museums have to work with. But I didn't get that out. So look forward to Juneteenth, and then sometime in the fall we'll be open.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tim. You're a great moderator. I want to thank all the panelists for their expertise and insights. I think we all learned a lot today. The arts help define our community. They help define who we are, our humanity, our education. They bring great joy and entertainment. And the GMC enthusiastically anticipates the full return of the arts. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
So a link will be sent to all the GMC members of a video of this meeting. And our next meeting is June 14th. The topic will be the strength and stability of our local utilities, beginning with WEC Energy Group, MMSD, and Waterworks. So again, thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Dr. Weston and Greg Wesley. And everyone have a great week. This meeting is now adjourned.